Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. The global markets have been in a state of mayhem ever since President Trump decided to go through with his tariff policies. In fact, 9:30 a.m. today, India's tariffs have kicked in at 26%. The other worrying aspect that's come in overnight is President Trump reiterating the call on tariffing pharmaceuticals. Remember, pharmaceuticals have been exempt so far, but this is the second time in the last few days that President Trump has talked about tariffing pharmaceuticals like we've never seen before, in his words. President Trump also speaking at a dinner last night and claiming that countries were calling him up, leaders were calling him up to try and get deals done. The USTR, of course, making it clear at this point in time that there will be no exclusions to what has been proposed by the US as far as tariffs are concerned. But to talk us through what we should now expect as far as America's intent to do business with the world is concerned, the impact of all of this on the global economy, and more importantly, how India finds itself positioned in the global markets, is noted economist and a very vocal critic of the tariff policies, Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you very, very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. A lot has happened over the last few days. A lot has happened overnight, as I pointed out. As you look at these tariffs and playing themselves out, what worries you the most today?
If something wipes out $10 trillion of market capitalization in 2 days, you're probably on the wrong track. The United States is on the path of wrecking the world economy once again. I say once again because the U.S. has a bad habit of wrecking the world economy. It did it in 1930 with tariff increases, the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were one of the major provocations that led to the worldwide Great Depression of the 1930s. It did it in 2008 by blundering in its forced bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers on September 14th, 2008, and that put the world into a tailspin, the Great Recession. Now it's doing it a third time. This is out of the fervid imagination of one person. This is not U.S. policy. This is not congressional policy. This is not U.S. public policy. This is Donald Trump's policy. He is single-handedly wrecking the world economy. And I think the damage is going to be done before it gets undone. So we're not in a good situation. The markets are not the only ones telling us that. We're hearing from business people all over the world that long-made value chains, supply chains for critical commodities, for consumer goods, for industrial products, for making automobiles, for making smartphones, you name it, are being profoundly disrupted. And we have somebody laughing as the world economy burns. And that is our president. So this is not at all a case with the silver lining, unfortunately.
Well, it doesn't look like there is any silver lining at this point in time, Professor Sachs. But, you know, you talked about the wrecking ball approach that President Trump seems to have taken and the impact it's going to have as far as global growth is concerned. But let's talk about America. You know, Larry Fink saying we're already in a recession. Bill Ackman, one of the biggest supporters of President Trump, coming out and saying we're headed into a long winter now as far as the economy is concerned. The impact so far is largely been felt in the financial markets. When do you start to see this impact the real economy?
If the survey data are correct, we're going to see it in consumer purchases declining sharply in the coming months because consumer sentiments are falling through the floor. That means that we're going to have a significant demand shock in addition to all the multiple supply shocks of disruption of global supply chains. These businessmen expected to be making fortunes at a business-friendly administration. For them to be speaking out after they invested so much money to buy the presidency for this person is also indicative of their state of mind. So I think what we're hearing, again, I'm not a short-term macro forecaster, but we're hearing that the odds now are odds on for a U.S. recession in 2025.
Odds on a U.S. recession in 2025. But let's talk about the latest development with respect to China. And the president saying that China is going to be tariffed higher, another 50%, which takes the total quantum to over 100%. China saying it will retaliate with countermeasures. Now, do you believe that the possibility of China selling U.S. bonds, it holds about $800 billion in U.S. bonds directly, there are many in the market who believe that that will be the option of last resort. How do you believe China is likely to play this out?
China, of course, has been diminishing the share of its foreign exchange reserves held in dollars for several years now. China is not naive when it sees that the U.S. has confiscated the reserves of several countries now in which the U.S. has geopolitical opposition. So the U.S. took and froze, of course, the more than $300 billion of Russian reserves, technically in Belgium and Euroclear. The U.S. grabbed the foreign exchange reserves of Venezuela. It did the same for Iran. It did the same for Afghanistan. It did the same for North Korea. The U.S. weaponized the dollar well before this latest round of trade hand grenades. So China already has been diminishing its holdings of dollars. The BRICS have been working on, and I hope that they accelerate, non-dollar payments, because we're going to need, the world's going to need alternative ways to make payments when you have this kind of obstreperous and unstable government at what is now the core of the payment system in the world. So China definitely will not just sit there with its forex reserves in dollars. Whether it will act abruptly in a reaction or whether it will gradually continue the direction of sell-off, I don't know. But it will continue in the direction of disgorging itself of U.S.-denominated assets.
You know, the question is whether this is the end of American exceptionalism, and you certainly seem to believe that it is. But is it also the end of China's isolationism? Has the Trump administration, the unintended consequences of this tariff policy, as well as the way that he's going about addressing friends and foes, will it push people to actually re-engage with China?
Well, first, it's not the end of American exceptionalism, and what America is doing is absolutely exceptional, just exceptionally damaging. So it's the end of
a different kind of exceptionalism.
It's the end of American leadership, I would say. It's the end of other countries looking to the United States as a stabilizer, as a rule-based order, although that was quite frayed already, but now no one could utter those words with regard to the United States. Similarly, China was not in any way isolationist. It was the major trade partner of probably 150 countries in the world. But China has aimed for the last decades to be a responsible participant in the international system, not to put its head out too far in leadership. Deng Xiaoping famously advised China, bide your time, keep your head down. We need to rebuild after a long century and a half of economic difficulty, what they call the century of humiliation. And so Deng Xiaoping said, keep your head down. Now China can't quite keep its head down. China is under direct attack by the Trump policies, and this is one of the core dimensions of the Trump policy. Part is protecting American economy in a very naive and, I think, doomed to fail way. But part of it also is a hostile action vis-a-vis China especially, which is that China must be broken in its global success story because it's a competitor with the United States. So China now has to take a more leadership role. I think China will have to enable the renminbi to play a more international currency role. It's been very gradual, step by step, but I think it's going to have to accelerate. China, I think, will accelerate the calls for the BRICS, of which, of course, India is a founding, crucial member, to play a somewhat of a balancing role to the United States in the international scene, especially calling on the BRICS to reinforce their open trade with each other, because after all, the BRICS is more than 40% of the world economy. It's about half the world population. It matters a lot. And so I think that grouping is going to play a more important role. So I believe that China reflected on this and said, we're not going to be bullied, we're not going to be blackmailed, we're not going to be cornered by the United States. And so the brawl is very real right now and very dangerous.